I want to introduce to you Dr. William Rankin. Dr. Rankin is a professor of English and the director of educational innovation at Abilene Christian University. He's one of the creators of ACU Connected, which has been recently named an Apple Distinguished Program. As part of this innovation, Dr. Rankin has worked on everything from defining pedagogical approaches to designing interface elements. He's an Apple Distinguished Educator, sits on the ADE Board of Directors. He's been interviewed on National Public Radio, the BBC, CBC, NBC Nightly News, and has spoken now in 25 countries across the world. Please welcome Dr. William Rankin.
Hey, thanks, George. Hi. So, as George mentioned, we started looking at mobility about 5 years ago now. We're this little school in the middle of Texas, several hours from here. My friend Aline Sada came from Mexico, from another country, and it's closer than Abilene is to here. But we started giving all of our students iPhone and iPod Touch about 5 years ago, and we've seen some amazing things happen. And we've recognized more and more that not only do these devices change the way we teach and the way we learn, but they change the kind of media we need and the kind of media we create, which is very exciting. And I want to talk today about, the title of my talk is about transforming learning in third age education. I probably should tell you what I mean by the third age. So, I really think that our educational technologies tend to mirror our informational technologies and the way we distribute information. So the first age is really the age of hands, because that was the only way for us to deliver information, was by hand. We had to handwrite it, or you had to be in hand's reach of someone to learn something from them, to get information from them. We changed that when we changed our informational technology, and we began to be able to distribute things by print. So the second age was really the age of print that lasted from the 15th century until not too long ago. But the third age is now the age of data, and that's a very, very different world. And if I look at the kind of way these three worlds work, it sort of goes like this. In the age of hands, the focus was really on context. We made things in context, and people could use them in context. Again, because these were pieces of information, these were learning strategies that were very situated because you had to be close to someone. You had to be within hand's reach of them. And the benefit was localization, which I, for some reason, have spelled the British way. And the idea of things being very localized. But the challenge was, it was very hard for people to access information. Information didn't travel freely. We solved that problem with print. Print, for the first time, allowed information to move broadly across not only cultures, but across national lines. But the characteristic of print is that it's a control model. Not very many texts are allowed into that model. Only a few texts get printed. And the people who control the presses control the information. So that control model, I think, was a real challenge for us, a real challenge from an educational standpoint. The benefit of print, though, was it allowed us to distribute information very freely. But it also gave birth to one of the first information explosions. There was so much stuff, and it made information for the first time hard to find. You couldn't just ask someone. You had to do all this research. You had to spend all kinds of time trying to find the information you needed. But we solved the problem of finding by moving to data. And in the age of data, this third age of information, we see some new criteria, some new characteristics moving in. For example, it's now completely easy for people to make new things, which I'll be talking about more in just a second. And we can customize our materials, which is very interesting as well. I can have a completely different book than everybody else sitting in my class, because I can now remix things, and that's interesting. But the challenge now, with all this stuff being made, has to do with how we decide what's real, what's valid. Assessment becomes really critical for us. So that's the third age, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today, this age of data, and what teaching and learning looks like in this age of data. I want to begin, though, with a very ancient metaphor for learning. So this is actually a metaphor that comes from our friend Aristotle, and it's the metaphor of the beehive. Aristotle said that learning was like, well, a beehive. And if you think about how that works, it's kind of an interesting process. Because what bees are supposed to do, of course, is they're supposed to go out and find flowers. And they sip nectar from those flowers. They get sustenance from those flowers, which they take back to the hive as food for future generations. And of course, in taking that back, they tell the other bees, they do this little dance, and they tell the other bees where the flowers are. So there's already a process of going out into the world and finding things, bringing them back so other people can go out and find things. So that other bees can go out and sip other nectar. But the critical piece here, a really important piece, is that it's not just providing food for the bees. It's not just, something where they make food for their future. They also make food for other creatures. They produce real fruit in the real world. And thinking about that metaphor and thinking about my own educational experience, my own experience as a teacher for a long time and as a student, well, so I don't see that happening a whole lot. I mean, I think about the assignments that I give my students, which typically they start at my desk, and then they go to my student's desk, and then it comes back to my desk, and then it goes to their desk again. That's it. That's the whole process. That's the whole cycle. I surely can't be out of time. You just showed me the out of time thing. No, that's wrong. Anyway. And this leads me to a few questions. First of all, where are the flowers in that process? Where's the fruit? What is the dance that we're doing in that? Where's the honey? And what's the hive? I mean, I don't see that whole process of beekeeping repeated in my students' work, in what I expect them to do. It's limited, just going from my desk to theirs and back again. Now, what we talk about often, we say, well, academic productivity, what is that? Well, we often mean it's books, right? That's what we talk about. That's really what the honey is. Well, students should make books. But not very many students have gotten to do that. And don't get me wrong, I love libraries. My favorite library, my favorite place in the whole world is Duke Humphreys Library at the Bodleian at Oxford. Oh, cork floors, medieval manuscripts. It's a great place to be. And I recently found this amazing university in Guanajuato in Mexico. We were there. This place has 60,000 15th and 16th century volumes, the earliest printed books. I mean, I got to hold in my hands a book that came off of Gutenberg's press. That's astonishing. It's a great thing. And to think about the role those books played, carried all the way across the ocean from Europe to this place that becomes the center of the Mexican Revolution. That's huge. That was an amazing thing, an amazing place to be, an amazing historical site. But when I think about my own library, it's kind of not quite the same right now. Things are changing, and I want to think about how those changes are happening. So one person we've turned to a lot is Marshall McLuhan. McLuhan was a writer and thinker. He flourished in the 60s and 70s, really. He said something really important. He said, we're always living ahead of our thinking. So if you want to see what the future is, don't look to theorists. Look to popular culture. Look at what's going on around you, because that's going to be the stuff that we ultimately will make our theory about. We'll think finally after we've lived it. So I want to think about popular culture, for example. How many of you know this guy? Fun too. Really? What have the rest of you been living under a rock? This is a kid. He lives in South Korea. You never see his face, by the way. He has that baseball cap down. And he plays this version of Pachelbel's canon on the electric guitar that just shreds. And there he is. He's sitting in his bedroom. He's got his webcam on, and he just plays this amazing version of Pachelbel's canon, which he records and puts up to YouTube. More than 10 million people have watched Fun2's version of Pachelbel's canon. And a really interesting thing happened. Because people started writing up and saying, wow, that's great, that's really cool. Then some people, some really talented people, started playing their versions of his version of Pokeball's canon and putting their versions up on YouTube. So this whole kind of community sprang up around it, but it's really hard. So what happened for him happened, it's something I'm sure that happens in most of your classrooms as well. People wrote in, they said, look, this version is very, very hard. Could you please give us something harder? So his next one is he's playing Vivaldi's Four Seasons, which requires him, by the way, to record himself doing two different versions, right? And it's amazing. Do you realize more people have watched Fun 2 than live in his city? It's like 1/8 of the population of his entire country have watched him. And he's just sitting in his bedroom playing his guitar. Because it turns out what was once completely out of reach for most people is now something that people carry around in their pockets. I carry around in my pocket now a recording studio. I carry around in my pocket every day a music studio. I carry around in my pocket a printing press with a distribution mechanism to reach the entire world. That's amazing. And something that didn't exist even just a few years ago. And that's why what our students are doing all the time is making stuff. And the stuff they're making becomes incredible, right? I mean, and it's really interesting if you think about the process of this. Let's take Wikipedia as an example. I love Wikipedia, by the way, as a teacher. It's a great resource. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Now, obviously, it's an encyclopedia, and I certainly don't want my college students, just citing an encyclopedia, but it's a great starting point. And if I think about what happens here, right, there's this model that happens. More access yields more participation. Because Wikipedia is available for everybody, and because anybody can contribute to it, people start doing that. They start participating, putting stuff in there. And as they put stuff in, they start taking care of it. Now, it's interesting. Wikipedia has been shown to be more valid than Britannica in several studies, which, by the way, just this past week went out of print. There will be no more printed Encyclopedia Britannicas. Part of the problem with Britannica, of course, is it's got great sections on, the history of France and, molecular biology and things like that. But it doesn't, for example, have a great section on Klingon or on anime or on a lot of stuff that people want to look up. But because more people can participate, more people start putting in sections in Wikipedia and taking care of those sections. And that creates more and more diversity. Wikipedia becomes an increasingly rich resource. And that diversity means more and more people come to it because it's this great place to go. And the more people who come to it, of course, the more people who participate and the more diversity and custodianship there gets. It's a self-building cycle, which is really cool. Or I think about something else. The photo library in the Library of Congress is one of the largest and most renowned photo libraries in the entire world. Right? I mean, this is this great collection of historic photographs in the Library of Congress. But if this square represents all of the pictures in the Library of Congress, all of the photographs, then this is the relationship of all of those to all the photos on Instagram. And if this is all of the photos on Instagram, this is the relationship of that to all of the photos on Flickr. And if this is all of the photos on Flickr, this is the relationship of that to all of the photos on Facebook. Facebook right now has 140 billion pictures. Actually, it's bigger now. That was in September of 2011. 140 billion pictures. That's 20 pictures for every person on the planet. It's 1,000,000% bigger than the Library of Congress. Yeah, you say, but it's pictures of people's cats and their parties and whatever. What good is that? Well, I think about Pompeii. What's valuable about Pompeii? I mean, what we always have gotten is we've gotten the stories of the big people. We've got the stories of the historical figures and the people who are in the Library of Congress, and that's great. But what's important about Pompeii is we got to see how everybody lived, and it changed our understanding of Rome. We got to see, for example, what their daily bread looked like. Because everything was preserved. I guarantee you that in the future, something like Facebook is going to be a massively important resource for historians to understand what we valued, what we loved, what we cared about, how we understood the world. That's going to be huge. Do you guys know the game Foldit? Anyone? Any Foldit players? Foldit is a protein folding game, as you'd imagine, right? So, in your free time, if you want to mess around with proteins, you can get onto Foldit, and you can see there you can participate with a team, or you can participate individually, and your challenge is just to make the most efficient proteins. Proteins, it turns out, are really weird and really interesting. And in fact, they're at the center of some of the biggest medical problems, medical challenges that face us right now. Protein folding is implicated in cancer. It's the cause, for example, of mad cow disease, is a protein that's misfolding. And it's something that it's accessible to almost anyone. You learn a few basic rules, like hydrophobic parts of the molecule tend to move towards the inside and things like that. And you just kind of mess around with it. Well, researchers have been working, there's a particular protein on the AIDS virus that helps that virus implant. And researchers, these scientists had been working for 10 years. They had had a supercomputer crunching numbers trying to figure out this one particular protein. If you can stop this protein, if you can figure out how to interfere with this protein, you can stop the AIDS virus from implanting. For 10 years, they fed this information into supercomputers that couldn't figure it out. So they decided to put that protein into Foldit to see what people could do. Game players solved that protein in 2 weeks. So this is the scientific paper. What I love is, of course, in scientific papers, the order of authorship is the order of importance. So look at this. You've got Firas Khatib is the first author, then Frank DeMaio, then the Foldit Contenders group, then the Foldit Void Crushers group. And what they did was, they just messed around with the molecule to figure it out. They were more creative and more powerful than a supercomputer working for 10 years. 2 weeks of gameplay. This is stuff people are doing in their free time. And they're solving real problems in the real world. They're making fruit in the real world, just with their free time. I think about something else. There's this great study recently that looked at all of the communication that was happening in this particular community. And they found some amazing results. I mean, I would love for these results to be the results in my classroom, right? 86% of all the communication involved social knowledge construction. This is people working together to understand, to make knowledge about this situation that they were in. They're using systems-based reasoning, counter-arguments, data or evidence, model-based reasoning, all this great stuff. But this is not an educational community. This is the world of Warcraft. In fact, the researchers Steinkühler and Duncan found that 65% of all the communication in that group displayed an evaluative epistemology in which knowledge is treated as an open-ended process of evaluation and argument. I mean, after all, what can people really learn in World of Warcraft? It's just about figuring out how to work together to solve problems, and that has nothing to do with the real world. Or I think about some other things. The Joan Gans Cooney Center at the Sesame Workshop did some studies recently, and they found some amazing statistics. 80%. That's the percentage of 0 to 5-year-olds, 0 to 5-year-olds who are on the internet at least once a week in the US. 80% of 0-year-olds to 5-year-olds are on the internet once a week. 70% of those same kids are on a mobile phone once a day. Or I think about a statistic we heard a couple of years ago at a conference in London. 40% of British fifth-year students used a mobile phone to complete an in-class assignment in class, even though mobile phones were banned at their schools. You can't fight this stuff. More people have access to mobile phones now than have access to toothbrushes. We talk about transformation. We talk about what it means to transform. Let me tell you what transformation is not. I mean, what we could say is, well, what we need to do is take the tools of the past and then we could just, put them into a new technology, right? But that's not transformation. That's not what we're talking about here. And I guarantee you at this point in time, the reason you need to do a pilot is because you don't know where you're going. I think we know where we're going. I don't think we need any more pilots. It's time to do something real. It's time to embrace this stuff. The world is saturated with it, permeated with it, except for our classrooms, where we treat our classrooms sort of like airplanes, right? Please shut down all electronic devices, place your tray tables and creativity in the upright and locked position. Don't talk to anyone until we land. What should our classrooms look like? How should they be designed? And what should our future educational spaces look like, our learning spaces? I mean, should we really keep focusing on individual work and little carols walled off from everything else? Is that really what we want to do? Should my model of the my desk to their desk to my desk, should that be what we're doing? Is that going to produce the fruit that we want? Charles Eames, famous designer, designed the Eames chair, designed a pavilion for IBM, and then made these amazing films for IBM. Really important fellow. He said, "Design is a plan for arranging elements in such a way as best to accomplish a particular purpose." So design is about making something happen. It's serving a purpose. What is the purpose of our educational space? What do our educational spaces communicate? I mean, if I think about them, if I think about how they're built, if I think about how this room is built, it's really a space designed for rhetorical questions. I've asked a bunch of questions, and none of you have answered me. Why is that? See, you didn't answer me again. Because you're not supposed to, because this is a space designed for rhetorical questions. In fact, questions that we already have the answers to, and the answers are in the back of the book, right? But that presupposes a static world. Questions that will never change, answers that will never change. I don't think that's the world we live in right now. I think our world no longer needs those kinds of answers that we already have. In fact, recently, Seth Godin at EDUCAUSE this past November said, "Never again is someone going to pay you to give them answers they can look up online." Why would they? I can look them up instantly. They'll only pay you to solve problems that don't yet have answers. If that's the world we're living in, how are we preparing our students for that world? I mean, what we typically want from our students is their attendance and their compliance and their uniformity. Those first initials look familiar to me. I'm not sure what that is. So much so that it's frequent that, factories and classrooms are sometimes sort of indistinguishable from one another. And part of that is that Frederick Taylor, one of the great management gurus, right? Taylor writes the Principles of Scientific Management, and what he says in that book is that people need to be really the same as the parts that they work on in a factory. If your parts are interchangeable, your people should be too. We should figure out where they fit, and then train them for fitting in that place, and then if that person leaves or dies or moves away or something happens, well, then I can plug another person in the same way that I do with the factory model. The problem is, I think, as our world has gotten more and more complex, and as we've decided we really need to be standardizing our students more and more, the problem is if you standardize all of the parts in a machine, you get a machine that doesn't work very well. Because if all the parts are the same, nothing can really happen. This reminds me, of course, as you would expect, of the Cavendish banana. Do you know about the Cavendish banana? What do you know about the seeds in your bananas? There, in fact, in most cases, there are no seeds in bananas anymore, because those bananas are the Cavendish banana, which has been designed not to have seeds in it, because the seeds are ugly. They're black, and they're kind of the size of probably like poppy seeds, and it ruins the aesthetic of the fruit. the Cavendish banana is not a real fruit because it can't grow. It can't repopulate itself. It's seedless. Which means what you have to do if you want to grow more Cavendish bananas is you have to take a cutting of the first Cavendish banana plant. In fact, almost all of the bananas now grown in the world are Cavendish bananas. And they are all a clone of one another, which creates a monoculture. An interesting thing happened a few years ago. There was a fungus that started striking Cavendish bananas. Well, they don't have immunity, and they can't develop immunity because they can't change. They're a monoculture. What that means is now several cultivars of the Cavendish banana are no longer able to be grown because they can't withstand the change that's taken place in the world. They can't defend against that fungus. If we're going to create a strong educational community, we cannot create monocultures. We cannot create cultures where everybody does the same thing in a standardized way all the time. We have to have diversity. I mean, part of it has to do with our technologies. With books, where every book was the same, well, we started standardizing our students as well. But now, I don't think we have to do that. We don't have to standardize our students. We don't have to teach old school any longer. We talk a lot about engagement and finding a way to engage our students, but remember that engagement is about a two-way commitment. It's not one way. Well, my students just aren't engaging. Well, are you being engaging? Are you engaging them in work that's real, that's meaningful? Because that's something very important. You know, we used to focus a lot on informational delivery, and it's ironic, I know, that I'm critiquing informational delivery while doing a lecture. But we have to do something more. I think now we have to build things. We have to get rid of that model that was just about teachers delivering information, and we have to start building information together. One of the things you can do to start building, of course, is inspire people. I'm hoping that's something that happens today with all of the talks that you'll hear. But we've got to move from a model that's just focused on consumption. We've got to add some things to it. I know that there's TLC3. I have C4, actually, which is explosive. And here's how to get that explosive combination, right? We need to focus not just on consumption, which is where I take in information, but curation, where I put information together, where I assemble that information into new things, and then where I start creating my own information to add into that mix. And of course, in adding my own information, I start working with other people and collaborating. This is the way to create a truly engaging educational environment. So, why should we change, though? I mean, come on, it's just hard. Yeah, you're talking about a lot of stuff, and it sounds good, but it's just too hard to do all that. Which brings me, of course, back to the Horta. The Horta, of course, appears in The Devil in the Dark, a Star Trek First Generation episode that appeared first on the 9th of March in 1967. It is what William Shatner describes as his favorite episode ever, which may or may not be impressive to you, I don't know. In this episode, the stardate, of course, is 3196.1, the Enterprise finds itself circling Janus 6, which is a mining planet. And the miners on that planet mine very important things, and that's great. Except, you know, they get this call from the lead miner, and he says that an important piece of equipment has gone missing, and some of his people have been killed. And there's this creature, this devil in the dark, right? This horrible creature that's doing that. So, of course, there's a red shirt who beams down and he dies. But Kirk and Spock find this creature and they set their phasers on it and they knock off a piece of it, this horrible creature, the Horta. And they try to figure out what this thing is. Kind of in the Kirk, you know, the traditional Kirk shoot first, ask questions later approach. There's a great scene, by the way, where this piece that's been knocked off, they get Bones to put it back on, and he says, "Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer," because he has to cement it back on, because it's a silicon-based creature. But this creature is leaving all these weird holes all over the place. I mean, it turns out it can move through rock as easily as we move through air. And they find all these things. The miners have been breaking them. They can't figure out what these things are. There's just, you know, all these rooms full of these weird spheres, and they're trying to figure out what in the world those are. It turns out those are the eggs of the Horta. The Horta live for 10,000 years, and at the end of 10,000 years, all of the Horta but one die, and that one is the nursemaid for the next generation of eggs. Spock mind melds with the Horta, and of course there's this great point where he shouts out, "Pain! The fault of ages!" What they realize is the miners, just because they don't really know any better, are destroying the future of this creature. So they make an alliance with the Horta because they now understand it. They understand what its values are. And an amazing thing happens. The little Horta hatch, and they start making little holes all over, and the miners working with them now instead of against them, the miners discover all kinds of amazing new resources on the planet, which the Horta are more than happy to help them get. Working together, they can do more than they could do working apart, which reminds me of something happening at my school. A few students have started this movement called Red Thread Movement. It's at redthreadmovement.org. So one of our students, she's 17. She's in Romania, and she's working at a halfway house for women who've been sexually trafficked. And it really convicts her. And what especially convicts her is she realizes those girls are the same age she is. And they're typically from Nepal. And she thinks, I've got to do something. But she's 17. What can she do? Well, she gets to college. She starts talking with her roommate about this. It's just really heavy on her heart. And they figure, you know what? We can't do a big thing. We can't end the sexual trafficking of women. But we could do something small. So they start making red thread bracelets, weaving them, and they sell them in the campus center of our university. And in doing that, what they do is they use the proceeds to help start buying legal assistance for these women, to provide education for them, to help their families not sell them into slavery in this way. Those bracelets are now on sale in more than 50 U.S. universities, and they're starting to move internationally. And to date, those two 17-year-old girls have rescued hundreds of women. Those women, in turn, by the way, are making more red thread bracelets that they're selling to help rescue their countrywomen. That initiative has gotten massive attention because what those girls want to do is they want to do something real in the world. They found this problem and they want to solve it. It's interesting. One of the students is an international justice major. She's a political science major. The other one's an international business major. Do you think they're learning more in their classes or in doing this? They're the Horta. We can either work with them or work against them. Our students want to do something real, and we don't need to spend our time just turning them into carbon copies of one another. We don't need to keep standardizing them. What we need to do is help them find the resources, find the places they want to go. They're already doing this. They're already connected in lots of ways. They're going out into the world. They're finding situations, and they need us to work with them to solve those problems. And it turns out that's the way we're going to figure out how this world works. That's the way we're going to assess. All this information that goes out comes clear when you try to use it to make something, to make a solution. The problem is our model of the classroom has been too small. This is the classroom. And the old mantra that we used to have, that it was all about location, 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 that's over. It's about connection, connection, connection. And the more we can do to help our students connect, the better. Because what they want to do is they want to go out and find things, and they want to bring it back. That's food for the future. And they want to send their friends out to do more. And they want to make real fruit in the real world. So if you want to change the world, your task as a teacher is simple. All you have to do is help your students just be. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Bill. you have questions about this, comments that you'd like to share, I want to remind you about the URL that you can go to submit those. We're going to take a short 15-minute break. Please be back here, ready to go at 9:45.